Welcome back to Off the Pitch, the podcast where we chat with individuals working within and shaping the game of soccer from off the pitch. Today's guest is Michelle Hyncik, who is the president of NWSL side Utah Royals. Michelle walked David and I for her entire career so far. Having started out on the traditional path as a lawyer working in law firms, she came across a job opening with the MLS. Following her passion and going back to her roots as a college soccer player, she applied for the role and ultimately got it. Several years later, she decided to make the move from Manhattan to Utah to follow this passion even deeper and go inside of a club serving as general counsel for Real Salt Lake. Most recently, she took over the helm of revitalizing and bringing back to life their expansion club in the NWSL, Utah Royals. Michelle gave David and I a great behind the scenes look at what that checklist looked like of how to move forward when they brought the club back to life, the challenges they've overcome on the journey so far, and the goals that they set for the team not just in this first year, but far beyond. Now, if Michelle's work experience and background didn't speak enough for itself, when you add in the fact that in the last 6 years she's also had 4 children, it makes her career and her accomplishments all the more impressive. Now, I'm confident that you're not only going to leave this conversation feeling informed and educated, but more importantly, inspired by someone who is following their passion from the heart and really making a change in women's soccer and soccer as a whole. So, with all of that said, let's start the episode. All right. Well, Michelle, thank you for sharing some time with us today, and we're excited to hear everything about you yourself, your career. You're actually the first person we've had on from an NWSL club. So We don't like that it's taken 18 or so episodes to get someone from the NWSL in, but we're very grateful that it's you and that we get to hear your journey and your insights from your time, particularly, of course, with the Royals, so we'll get into. But we, of course, know a lot about yourself from what we could pick up online. But for anyone who doesn't know who you are, they've never heard your name, would you mind just giving a quick run through of who exactly you are? And then, of course, a run through of your career from, let's say, your internship that we know you had to today.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for having me on. So yes, Michelle Hyncik. I've been the president of the Utah Royals almost 2 years. Bringing an NWSL franchise to Utah is definitely the pinnacle of my career. Has been just a total privilege, the career opportunity of a lifetime to bring professional women's soccer here to Utah, to build the club, to the roster construction, everything from helping with the sporting side, building out the staff, the branding, and most importantly, connecting the team to the community. It has been an absolute a privilege. And prior to being the president of the Utah Royals, I served as the general counsel for Real Salt Lake since 2020 and drafted the expansion option when in conjunction with an ownership transition for RSL, the organization. And once I drafted that option to bring an NWSL team here, was then gifted with that phenomenal opportunity to lead the women's team. Prior to coming to Utah, moving to Utah, I served as senior legal counsel for Major League Soccer. Covered a huge breadth of different teams and clubs during my time at the league office, and worked closely with the commissioner and Mark Abbott, who is really an architect of MLS, and the opportunity to work with Commissioner Garber and Mark on a number of different expansion and other huge projects that MLS was was also a number of career highlights there. And I joined MLS. I had very an atypical career path into sports prior, because I served as a very traditional regulatory attorney, was senior associate at WilmerHale, and didn't really, outside of my law school days, in academic interests and pursuits, didn't have a background in the sports industry. And so MLS was really the starting point to get me on this trajectory. But I did play soccer. I was a 4-year varsity player at Harvard. Dropped a lot of bows as an outside right defender. Definitely, soccer has been my complete identity for my whole life, and playing career. And so now the to be able to practice law in the sports industry, and then particularly, like you said, the last 2 years in the NWSL has been just mind blowing. I never, in my wildest dreams, can imagine I could be able to kind of combine those two parts of my identity and passion, and bring to young men and women, soccer as an outlet, as a resource, to help build their own careers and life paths. So that's what's led me to this this seat. I hope that wasn't too broad of an overview, but that's kind of how led me to today with you both.
Yeah. No, thank you for the context. And I guess going back to the beginning of your career, the natural path of getting your JD, getting into law firms. When you got your first law firm job, and it was kind of at that point a typical route maybe for your career, what in your head did your career ahead of you look like? What were you planning, even though plans very much go out the window for a lot of people, but what did you think your career might look like back then before all of this obviously happened?
Yeah, I think, I would say I have not been calculated in any by any means in terms of, stepping stones or any career path or trajectory. I feel when you really just work hard and seize every opportunity, then naturally, hopefully, and put yourself kind of in uncomfortable situations, naturally your career will hopefully progress. But yeah, I would say when I first took, the big law job right out of law school, definitely I always had a desire and a hope that I would get back into sports, because like I said, I was, a collegiate athlete. During the summers, I even played for a WPSL team, NIAC, and soccer was my complete identity up and, through law school. So there was always kind of, a desire and like a gravitation towards the industry. And so things, even though I was a regulatory attorney and most of my clients were all, big financial institutions, my primary client was UBS, and, I was doing regulatory work, was kind of, it's like I would say a hybrid between litigation and transactional, because you're working on arbitrations, but you're also, doing diligence and auditing companies in terms of helping them with their policies and procedures and internal controls. But then you're also involved in these, kind of adversarial arbitration situations. So I would, in my pro bono work, actually, I would always try to get into the sports and entertainment industry, because WilmerHale didn't have a sports practice, at least in the New York office, that I could gain clients in. So I would try to, in my pro bono work, like I represented a huge photography agency, and I would try to, that's, one example of where I would kind of try to still get work in the practice areas that are valuable in the sports industry. So, but yeah, that being said, I definitely kind of just chugged through big law in terms of when I made it to the senior associate level, kind of not woke up one day, but really realized like, oh my gosh, I'm like, I don't know if I really want to be a regulatory attorney for the rest of my life and have financial institutions be my only bread and butter. And that's when I just very basic career type of searching where I started going on websites and sending out my resume and trying to network. And when there was I found out about the opening at MLS, was just pretty relentless in bugging them for a job. And so eternally grateful for Major League Soccer to give me the opportunity, because I definitely didn't have the typical background, and they took a chance to hire someone that definitely didn't meet the minimum requirements, I think, in the JD. And when I talk to students now, I think a lot of people are sometimes afraid to apply for stuff because they feel like they're not qualified. And I have never felt qualified for any job I've ever had. So I always encourage people, and I feel like I've never, my first day on the job, I've never really known what I'm doing or don't feel prepared. And that shouldn't, never let that be like a hindrance to you, because most people, as you find out, like most people don't have a ton of experience when they start out within a new role. And just feel confident in your abilities and your skill set, and know that even if your background isn't on point, then there's a reason you were given the opportunity. And to be confident and not focus on kind of all of your shortcomings, because I've felt like that in every single one of my jobs, including the president role. And I think you'll start in the introduction, but actually it was just recently announced that I have been offered and am transitioning to work for the Blitzer family office, which again, I don't feel fully qualified, but it's a phenomenal opportunity to serve as his family office general counsel and get to work across his sports properties. And this will be the first time that I'm branching out in the sports industry beyond soccer, because I have worked at an MLS and NWSL. So the opportunity to get exposure to different leagues and in different sports. Again, I feel super qualified and uncomfortable. And I don't know, from one day to the next what I'll be doing, but it's another kind of step in the career that you take and you dive in and get kind of thrown into the fire, which is fun.
Great. And so with getting that job at MLS, it's good. It's good I'm glad that it was a role that you just applied for, because I think a lot of times when we hear about people moving within different clubs, particularly, that it's, getting headhunted or you have a connection and then it just
Right.
makes sense as a lot of times a culture move. But I'm glad that you applied for the job. So, because that's a great point, that sports is, widely considered as probably the toughest industry to break into, because to your point, so many people have grown up with sports being their life. And
Yeah.
in terms of trying to connect career and passion, if you played a sport your entire life, working in it would probably be pretty fun as well. So with you maybe not meeting the minimum requirements, and we'll circle it all back, I'm sure, later in the call of, now that you've been in a position to hire and think about, people beyond just their resume, what traits of yourself or characteristics that you were able to speak to in that interview process, that they were able to just understand about you beyond your technical background, do you think it was that got you that job and got you that first foot into the door with working in soccer?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think definitely like not, don't need the athlete background. There's a number of different applicants that don't know much about soccer, like aren't either, they're not super fans, they haven't played. And I never see that as like a negative because some of the you know most talented people that I've worked with in the industry have either no interest in soccer or haven't played. Like I think that probably I shouldn't say no interest. Like you should, it's definitely good to know what's going on in the industry, but you don't need to be like a super fan or know the roster and budget guidelines. And you don't necessarily need to have either an athlete or a fan type of background. Like I think probably the qualities that I most look for are just I don't know if humility is the right word, but like a willingness, lack of it, and especially with the Royals, like we really built um on this kind of like humble and hardworking type of culture where we didn't want people coming in with huge egos that were like, this is how it needs to be done, and not like a team environment. So I think I probably most look for that like focus on collaboration, teamwork, um, a willingness to roll up your sleeves and help wherever is needed. And really the RSL president, John Kimball, too, he really embodies that. And he's been a huge mentor. I really like those type of characteristics he really espouses. And when I interview candidates, I look for that just eagerness and willingness to. I don't want someone that comes in and is like, oh, I'm an expert and I only do this, and this is my kind of my lane and I don't move outside of it. If I get a sense of that, it's uh, I just don't think it's a attractive quality in candidates. So yeah, I think that teamwork, that focus on collaboration and willingness to just roll up your sleeves and dig into whatever the organization needs to be done.
Yeah, that's good. I think that's been, I would say, a common trend, probably, David, right? Is hard work is always two of the
Yeah.
words that gets brought up when we ask any question like that, because
Yeah.
you can't you can't slow down in many cases in soccer. You can't just take the day off because the league will continue, the sport will continue. You can't hide anywhere. So, that no job too small mentality, and just at its core, you have to be willing to put in the work and work hard, is definitely been a common thing there we've seen. I guess when you pivoted from the law firm jobs and into the MLS as well, that was also a shift from going from being, in more of like an agency sort of environment with the firm to being in-house, and actually just, not having a client, but now you're just working in and one company, albeit I guess it's a different sort of scene because of you're working with all of the different clubs. So maybe it just almost paralleled there. But how did that change, impact your work in terms of having this portfolio of clients to now being in-house on focused on the one thing? How did that change how you went about your work, and, what were some of the biggest differences or learning curves going in-house for the first time?
Yeah, I think going from big law to in-house at a league, there's probably the biggest change was when you're at it and a challenge is like when you're at a law firm, the resources are immense and it's a very kind of like lockstep, also like progression. So you go from, summer associate to junior associate to senior, so and there's clear kind of hierarchies and the resources are immense. You have paralegals and secretaries and even just like your office resources, and that is really amazing for right coming out of law school because you're just so supported and you're really trained. Something that really helped coming from big law to in-house at MLS was that framework and mentality of thinking of each department in the league as a client. So I really brought that over from Big Law, thinking, the marketing line of business or the partnership line of business, the expansion line of business, the employment line of business. Like those are each one I would treat as a client. And the difference is now you're really embedded in that client, which is way more fulfilling and way more exciting and gratifying to actually be sitting and living and breathing and living and dying each day with that client. Because when you're at a firm, you're just, like you said, you're one step removed and you're outside. So that was immensely gratifying, to not just have that viewpoint and mentality of treating each department and each line of business as you would, as an advisor client relationship, but being embedded with the league and inside the league, was hugely gratifying. And then even more so, that then goes to the 100th degree, when you go in-house at a team, because even at the league level, at a lot of different points, I was covering multiple different teams. So I'd be their legal point of contact for, at one point it was half the teams in the league. And so then moving to the team level, it's like, oh my gosh, you really are living and dying each day with each win. And it's so event-based and event-driven. So moving to the club level, it was like even another step more, totally ingrained and embedded, with your team. So that progression has been really fulfilling, from a legal perspective, to be in that advisor role, and be so embedded with the team.
Yeah, I'm sure that change to actually caring about the wins and losses and draws for a club where you get to be a bit neutral. I'm sure you maybe had a favorite team, that under the table you were hoping would win games, but I'm sure, actually being tied to from start to finish with everything within the league itself, but then the club, when you care about the results and the standings. I'm sure that was a big change. So I guess that move from being in the league with the MLS to Real Salt Lake, how did that transition come about? Where did that opportunity come from? Talk us through that move as well.
Yeah, that was again, me just like applying. I covered RSL for I was at Major League Soccer for a little over 5 years, and during my time, I think actually during my whole tenure I covered RSL, so I was their legal point of contact. And so there's I made a number of different club visits, came out, got to know the team, got to know the community, and really just fell in love with Utah. So, would come out in the winter, came out in the summer, came out in the spring. When the job opened, I just said I really, reached out to the club and said I really want this job. And yeah, again, one of me just applying and saying, please hire me. But it was a huge benefit that I, knew the community. I really fell in love with Utah. It's very family friendly. I had two very young kids at the time, and I had been in New York for over a decade, and really wanted to move west. My family, I grew up in California and had wanted to, make the trek westward with my kids. And so, yeah, fell in love with Utah really, and with RSL, and just threw my hat in the ring, for the job. So
That's great. And then I guess having worked, because it sounds, when you hear about people maybe work at, again, an agency, of work in a marketing agency, they have a client or an accountant, and then they move into one of their clients in-house. That
uh-huh.
sounds, a fairly similar route to how you've been able to go from league to the club. And I guess with that, you've you got to see behind the scenes of, from a legal perspective, the other clubs in the league. Were there
Mhm.
any things, without maybe pointing to specific cases, but anything that you saw happening at other clubs that you knew to almost avoid when you went in-house with Real Salt Lake of like, okay, any, I don't know if it's headaches or issues the clubs have had that you now know how to steer the club away from that, or was that not at all a thing?
I do think that MLS and NWSL, like I haven't overwhelmingly, I've had like such a positive experience working with across the teams. Like I really do think, and it comes, it stems from the league, as they're deciding in the expansion process, different markets, different ownership groups, different teams. Like I do think that like the culture piece is a big part of it. And MLS has MLS had done an amazing job, and it really, stemmed from the commissioner and Mark and the type of people they are. Like I can't, say enough about them and Charles at the league office who really head up the expansion process. Like they just get they really, they're so decisive about what markets they're going to go into, covering the different teams at the league. Like I really had an overwhelmingly positive experience. And I went on so many different, club visits, almost visiting, every different market. And I always had an incredible experience. So I'm really like searching to think if of course, like there's different headaches, especially from a legal perspective that come up. And there's, some tense moments, but overwhelmingly, and then moving into the club level, you have this like enormous like camaraderie with the other teams. And at NWSL, even more so than MLS because it is, obviously smaller, and not definitely doesn't feel like a startup league, but it still kind of has that mentality of growth and, still like all of the building blocks are being, it's in such like, formative, in such a formative period that everyone really like is fully bought into the mission and has the same priority. Like they want the league to succeed. All the teams do. And you have this enormous camaraderie and collaboration and transparency and the relationship among the teams, even more so at NWSL, is so close. So that's been really eye-opening just in terms of how close I feel to to the other clubs too. And it was similar at MLS in terms of that camaraderie. So yeah, no, I wouldn't say that there was necessarily like a quote a bad apple or a team that I was like, oh, I would never touch that team. Definitely there's favorites. So like, even at the league office, amongst the lawyers, everyone is like, oh, I want this club, or I want to cover this club. I want to cover this club because, and that spans whether either because of the quality of the ownership or the front office are just good people to work with, or the market is cool. There's various different reasons, but no, overwhelmingly, like it's both of the leagues have done an amazing job of really quality markets and teams that not only are a pleasure to work with from a league perspective, but as colleagues at the club level as well.
That's awesome to hear because we've spoken to a number of people who've been involved with the league office, expansion teams in other leagues, as well as like legacy teams that have been within the league for a while. And that's one thing that has been pretty common among what they've said is that league camaraderie between front offices and people wanting to work together to not just make their league better and make sure that every team succeeds within its local market, but also making sure that the sport grows just nationwide. And so it's really cool to hear that even on the legal side and within the league side, league office side as well, that's shared with not just the group of people who are helping teams with their expansion process, but also just within everybody in the league office, and that they want to see that level of camaraderie and workmanship between everybody.
And yeah, like definitely permeates down from the league level, because if and I haven't now, just now in this new role, I'll start to experience other leagues, like what that environment is like. But for MLS and NWSL, I think they really do, they try to foster that environment, and it works. Like it permeates down, and I'll say like Angel City, when we got the Utah, um, the team, I was just blown away. They were like reaching out, Jess Smith and her entire group were just constantly reaching out, like how can we help you? Like opening up their books, like here's our budget for this. Like it was really just mind blowing, the transparency, and being like, here is like a playbook, and we want you guys to succeed and at every level. And really like the getting into like granular detail, any question like was never too prying. Like they really just open book, and that was phenomenal. Angel City just really, and all the teams, like I felt that from every team, like how can we help? We want everybody wants the league to succeed, and everybody wants new teams to be successful. So that was really mind blowing, just in terms of that transparency and like camaraderie and just wanting to help it, the new team, new kid on the block. So it's been a wonderful experience.
That's perfect. And that kind of transitions right into my next two questions. The first one is as you're moving kind of from the general counsel side, the legal side of working within a team, what did that transition look like to then managing a different arm of the organization within that team? Because you were working with RSL and being the general counsel for them, but then you move into this president role of an expansion NWSL team. And so that, as much as you kind of were seeing some of those decisions being made from your counsel side of things, now you're on the other side where you're receiving the counsel and you have to make those decisions. And then on top of that, you have to not build a new club completely from scratch, because the Royals did exist previously, but you were essentially bringing a brand new NWSL team into the league again. And so you have to do with what you have, but also reach out to other teams within the league and see if they can help you. And another thing that we've learned about from other individuals we've spoken to is that within the USL, the MLS, like both of those leagues have teams in their organization that will help expansion teams get started, get on their feet and get running. So my second question is, what did that process look like, and what did that help look like from the league, not just the other teams like you were just talking about?
Yeah. So you exactly like hit the nail on the head in terms of the transition was really difficult to go from the advisor role, the council role, to then being like the one that needs to make all the decisions and, be fully accountable. And it was definitely kind of a mental switch, because I love that advisory role is the best part of the legal side for me. So I think, first and foremost, and I referenced him before, the president of RSL, John Kimball, really, I just try, emulate everything he did, because and he was fully just there every step of the way. So every single event, like whether it was the draft party or every community event, he would show up for, or ask, where can I help you, like how can I help you prepare, where can I so having him and having a close relationship with him was really invaluable, and probably the biggest resource for me. I think thankfully, the first, I moved into the president role the year before the team came, so that time, that ramp up period is very legal heavy. Like I would say probably the legal for an expansion team, like the first hire I would make is or make sure you have a good lawyer to just help, because that's when you're doing all of your formative partnerships, you're, getting your ticketing provider, your service provider stuff also, like, and then the IP side. And so structurally, like that kind of architect period is very legal heavy. So for me, that was a good transition into the business and the revenue side. But the business and the revenue side, I think, the president, RSL president, John, was really was the most invaluable resource. And the ownership group as well, like, Blitzer is very involved, and Ryan, they were really every kind of decision point, they're there and super responsive. And similarly with the league, I think like the number one thing is just responsiveness and availability. And Bill Ordewer was my general counsel at MLS. So he was the general counsel that hired me as a lawyer. And then he happened to move over to NWSL when Utah got the bid. So that was another kind of full circle moment where I was again working with Bill, and he's very responsive. He's, it's blows my mind how many different things he has going on, but he'll always respond right away, and is there to help. So yeah, I think definitely did not, again, one of those moments where I didn't feel like I knew what I was doing the first day on the job. But ownership, the league, RSL provided just this incredible resources and support, which I think, to your point, every expansion, especially expansion teams, need. So yeah, those resources were invaluable, and very grateful for John, for Bill, and ownership for David, Ryan, and yeah, across the board.
That's awesome. It's really cool to see kind of how far like soccer and professional leagues have come within our country, and I'm sure being on the inside back in the late 2010s, like how far it's come even just from then to now, not just even from 1996 to 2010. The fact that all these new teams exist, and now there's branches within organizations that are full teams set up to help new teams exist and succeed, because everybody wants to help everybody is really cool. And that's not something that happened back in the day. So it's awesome to hear that that's getting around to every single level of the sport. As we were saying, you're the first person from the NWSL that we've had on, so it's really awesome to hear it from that side as well. One thing that you were kind of touching on with the Royals ramp up period was that you were saying it's very legal heavy. You've got to kind of get your ducks in a row before you can take certain steps, things like that. I was wondering, with that extended period of ramp up this time around, because when the Royals first moved to Utah from Kansas City, it was only, I think, a few months before they played their first game from the time that the team was announced. So there must have been some kind of checklist, for lack of a better word, of things that needed to get done and people that needed to be hired. So what were the like big parts and key aspects of that checklist that our listeners and ourselves might not know? And then what were some of the ones that nobody knew, that just popped up on you guys, that had to be taken care of then and there, rather than you knew about them beforehand and could handle them that way?
Yeah, I think, right when, so the whole kind of notion, and it's such a unique situation, right? Because the ownership came in and they had this option to basically bring the club back from hibernation, for lack of a better word, without getting into kind of the legal technicalities of that whole process. But, foremost for David and Ryan was how, when they looked at the prior iteration of the Royals, was like how connected the team was to the community, and how important the team was to the community, to especially to to the youth here in Utah as well, in the youth programs. And so, first and foremost on our checklist was like, how can we involve the community in that ramp up year in those decisions? So things like we did in choosing our new crest, we did town halls with former season ticket members to just get feedback on different crests, and that like those type of touch points, or hosting the draft party. Those on our kind of checklist, like those community pieces were really important. Having World Cup watch parties, like how can we connect and provide a forum for people that love women's soccer to be involved in the ramp up of the team. And then, I think, the next piece obviously is like, who are going to be your founding partners? And America First Credit Union really just, as soon as the team was announced, they were right there. They, again, one of our first priorities was like, who are we going to partner with to do a community give back? And we partnered with the YWCA, and America First was like, how much do you want to give to them? And we'll match it like right away. So I think finding those kind of really foundational partners in the community, like America First Credit Union, that are going to be like, they literally, you could ask them any type of community initiative and they will write a check and support and are right there. So like finding those foundational partners in the community are really important as well, because they enable you to make those connections to the community and give you the resources. And so that, again, we had this concept of like, who are going to be our founding partners. And Select Health is another one of those partners that just every step of the way, like what do you need? How can we support? How can we make sure that the team is succeeding? So those, that community piece, the partner piece, I think, the sporting side, obviously, like we had to, and Kelly, the current sporting director, her background, she really embodies also that, like roll your sleeves up, hardworking, will do anything that's needed, because she came from Reading and really was responsible for the team getting promoted and was there for decades, and during her time there had really served in every single role. I think like a Swiss Army knife is the perfect analogy in terms of she has knowledge in and can help in every role. So she was a phenomenal hire, because especially for an expansion team that's building, and like you said, things that are not on your checklist are popping up all the time, and so her ability to help in any type of role or in any type of situation was really incredible. And I kind of like she just took the reins and could do it all on the sporting side. So hiring her was a big checklist item, and it ended up being like the most important hire. So and the assistant sporting director, his name's Connor Omiki. He was he was an extern. So he was at Harvard Law School. He was an extern for me for my entire 3 years as general counsel. And I really like poached him away. He had I think he had already even accepted at a law firm. And I was like, you cannot go to this law firm. Like, you have to come work for the Royals and help build this team. And he has been absolutely, like, again, just helping wherever absolutely is needed. And yeah, now he's, helping Kelly on every agent relationship, all the negotiations with players and contracts. So yeah, I think, those hires are hugely important, for sure on the sporting side, because when you're connected to a men's team, there's you have the shared resources, and you can leverage on the ticketing side and get help. And that was huge. And we really had buy-in at the highest levels of the C-suite in terms of like, we are helping the Royals, and we're all one team, and we're all here to help. So to your point, like, I wasn't starting from scratch. I had a phenomenal CTO and Matt Rader. He our head of partnerships, where they all were just like, how can we help? What do you need? And but on the sporting side, like hiring Kelly and Connor were definitely the biggest hires. So yeah, it goes from the HR, the founding partnerships, the community pieces, all hugely important. And I had like probably the regulatory attorney side of me. Like, I'm used to building out these crons for big banks, and I did that for the Royals. Like, I had a huge Excel chart that is like, this needs to be completed by this date, and this huge checklist that's probably really annoying to anyone else that doesn't have a regulatory background. But yeah, we had that checklist, would track progress, and there were so many things that popped up and learnings that weren't on that checklist and weren't on that master tracker. So it was good to have, because it definitely just helps us move forward and achieve those milestones.
That's great. I'm sure that, yeah, that checklist, I'd assume some of those deadlines weren't hit, just with the nature of how it goes.
90%. Yeah, 99%.
Yeah. So beyond, I guess, the plan, the checklist, I would assume another common piece that is attached to all of that is, some goal setting of what do we want to achieve here, both from, a big picture standpoint, but actual, maybe trackable KPIs and tangible goals. What were some of those goals kind of in that first process before a new team had taken the field, to get it to that point? But then we're, of course, still only in the first season. So I'm sure a lot of the goals are still happening right now, or still ahead for the club. But what were some of those goals that were set at the beginning, and how did those conversations look of, we need to set goals, we need to have something we're working towards? What are those going to be?
Yeah. So the KPI, like, one huge goal was to sell out our first game, which we ended up accomplishing. But yeah, that was incredible, because we also set a record in Utah in women's sport. So making sure that the community and the team like felt connected in that first game, and was, again, like a career just pinnacle peak experience. And so yeah, that was the first. And then yeah, we have various different ticketing KPIs, and they couldn't be like, in the year that we're ramping up, we're looking a lot at like what the team was doing in 2019 as benchmarks, or what RSL was doing. But you have these new teams in the league, like San Diego and Kansas City, and obviously I've already referenced Angel City and what Julie and Jess and her team built. Like, they are blowing all those KPIs out of the water. And so we were like, okay, we cannot look back at 2019 or historically at all to set those benchmarks, because of the strides that the league and the other teams are really setting the bar and pushing the league forward. So we would look to them, and again, like Julie and her team just being like, here's the playbook, like, this is the KPIs that you need to hit and to accomplish, because we all want to drive the league and push the league to these higher revenue numbers and ticketing numbers that are just like astronomical compared to what the league was doing 5 years ago. And so they really help, set those in terms of like, and other KPIs are obviously like, these are the sponsorship dollar thresholds that we want to hit. And, our sleeve deal, our, the real kind of milestones are, obviously the jersey front on our sleeve. And for me, like, probably one of the biggest priorities, and my biggest focus was our training facility. So we had the option to do what the Royals had done before, which is they were based in the stadium and would just practice at a field a mile away to the stadium, or we could not do what the Royals did before, and we could build a new training facility adjacent to and connected to where the men train out in Harriman. And that was really actually like a huge decision that we really did a lot of diligence, because where we even sought guidance from the union and the league and former players, and we really wanted to make sure that we were making the decision that was best for the players. And there's a lot of different factors that go into that, because some of the players might think that practicing by the stadium is a more desirable area to live, or like, all these different factors, or like their commute is different. But we overwhelmingly, like when we put all of, everything together for those two decisions, the choice became really clear to build a new facility. And that was an enormous undertaking, and ownership, testament to them. They really put like how much, almost $4 million new facility, massive undertaking, huge. And that was it. Even though we had a lot more time than the first iteration, like there were time deadlines and pressures to get that up and running. And Kathy Kennedy really headed up that whole process and was phenomenal. And just opened it not too long ago, and that was a huge focal point for me. In addition to, we really wanted a partner to be a part of that, because that's new in women's sports. There's a lot of teams in the NWSL that don't have necessarily their own dedicated training facility or in a partner to support it. So that was a huge accomplishment for the Royals, to build that enormous new space for the women, to get a partner on board in Shark Ninja, and a huge milestone that we worked a lot of different KPIs leading up to accomplishing that.
Yeah, I think that's such an important piece of, thankfully, the trend that is happening with the increase in funding and investment, particularly in the women's side, is players spend most of their time not at the stadium. They spend it at the training facility. So having a place that you can call your own, right? That you're not in a college, the way a lot of teams will start out to be part of the nearest big college, or if they're an expansion club and just kind of tied on to the pre-existing men's side of things, but actually getting your own. Obviously, the closest one to us is we're in the Bay Area. So Bay FC, I saw a couple of weeks ago, just announced that they're getting their own training facility, because I know that they've been, I think it's San Jose State, training out of there. And that's obviously, again, they're in their first season as well, and it's okay. You need somewhere to train at the beginning, but I'm sure just from a player perspective, it'll be so much nicer, to have your own locker room where you're not worrying about anyone else, having to share anything with anyone, and having your own space to call home is so important for teams to succeed. I guess before we look to wrap up and being mindful of your time, you've spoken a lot about some of the mentors that you have had, the leaders that you've worked under, and now, of course, having been in the president role, you were a leader. You had people underneath you. You were hiring, as we'd spoken about earlier. What were some of the biggest traits, I guess, from past leaders and mentors that you had that not only stood out to you as good traits to have, but ones that you have actually looked to replicate yourself, that you've known what it's been like to work under someone who's portraying that sort of leadership style? So how have you looked at the craft yours based on, who you've worked with in the past?
Yeah, I think without getting like too personal and mushy and emotional, like I had a baby during this time, and I have 4 kids under 6. And for me, like the mentors that I've had are ones, and that have been like had the biggest impact on me are ones that embrace like who you are as a person and don't necessarily try to like bifurcate or create a false division between whatever is going on in your personal life and your workplace. So like fully embracing that and supporting that, because I think, you know, especially kind of in my very early years in my career, I was really nervous and tried to create like a wall between whatever is going on in like your personal life. It could be taking care of a parent, it could be a sibling, it could be any type of issue, but you never try to like show that. And if you can't make a meeting time, you'll like, you know, not say the real reason why you can't make it or whatever it is. So there were a number of different leaders, and Anastasia Denias is another woman. She moved into the general counsel role at MLS, where if there was like a meeting that was at 8 a.m. and she had her daughter's first day of preschool, like she would just say that. And I thought that was just amazing and so refreshing, and being like, yeah, it is important to be there for your daughter's first day of preschool, and don't be like ashamed of that and hide that. So I think what I really tried to bring to the Royals, and I hope now that I'm transitioning out of that role, what I really hope that I've left in kind of a legacy or a leadership quality is that kind of embracing of whatever people have going on in their personal life, and not being afraid to come to me and say like, hey, can we change this meeting time because I have to be at my daughter's recital, or, you know, whatever it is, to embrace like the people, everyone that you're working with as people, and know that everyone, you know, you're not going to be able to thrive in your workplace or feel at home and comfortable there, because sports is 24/7. It's your weekends, it's your nights. And so, you know, if you don't care for and embrace and support people holistically, and players, and, you know, all of your staff, you're not going to succeed or be a healthy work environment. And that was, you know, selfish for me too, because that, you know, I have really young kids. I just had a baby. I have to bring them with me to the games. Like I have to bring them with me to the training facility. In our training facility, it's one of the reasons why like it was really important to me to build a family room. So we have a family room there. If staff or players like have a nanny that they need to bring with them to the facility to you know, have a space for their kids, or and to have a room where women can you know, breast pump, and like all of those, they might seem like small, like, you know, things have been really important in my career to have people and leaders prioritize those kind of quote unquote like non-workplace priorities, but they actually are really, they should be important priorities in the workplace, because if you're not taking into account, you know, who people are holistically, then it's just not a healthy environment. So I hope that you know, Kelly and people that worked for me and with me on the Royals, like now as I transition out, could feel that support, and could feel like, hey, if you need to have your kid in the office for the day, like that's totally fine. Like if your nanny calls out sick or whatever it is. So that's probably was my top priority, because it was definitely a struggle for me throughout my career, and the leaders that had the most impact on my career and pathway really prioritize that.
Yeah, that's great. That has been a culture that you've gotten to see, and then of course brought in when you had the chance to sort of craft and create the culture yourself. That I was speaking to someone the other day about how COVID and working remotely and everything, I think has, you know, fundamentally shifted towards workplaces embracing the fact that people have a life outside of work. And to your point, you know, not having to lie or feel like you have to lie and say, I have a, you know, a dentist appointment at
Yeah.
9 a.m. when really you want to take your kid to their first day of preschool.
Right.
Because also, you know, at the end of the day, your manager, your leader is also just a person who also has their own life that maybe they don't show it, but they maybe would also like to show it, but they also have a boss. And if they know that you're at something to do with your kid, they'll most likely not send you any texts or emails. But if you're saying you're at the dentist office, they know you have 10 minutes in a waiting room that they might send you a text during. So it's, I'm sure, just fundamentally better that, you know, a lot of people are embracing the fact that everyone has a life outside of just their job as well. So that's great. Obviously, it's, if you were to just look at your work experience, it's extremely impressive. Knowing now, and I'm glad that you mentioned that you have 4 young children, it makes it exponentially more impressive. So first of all, you know, massive hand clapping to you for being able to have the success that you've had
Yeah,
so
I'm surprised
far.
none of them have barged. No one has barged in, or no sneak appearances. But
Yeah. But before we wrap up, you know, I'm sure obviously you're pivoting into a new role now. You're still fairly early in your career, so I'm sure there's so much greatness ahead of you that you'll still tackle, and things you'll move into in the future. But if you look backwards for a second, which, as we ask questions like this, it's often the first time that people do look backwards. So if you need to think for a second, feel free to. But what is one, or a couple, if you can pinpoint one on its own, moment? So not even just bringing the Royals back to life, but one more specific moment, one achievement, one milestone that you can look back on with the most pride in yourself. So not you and your team, not you and your department, but you, Michelle, that you can look back and think, I did that. You know, I accomplished that. I achieved that.
yeah, that is a really good. There's been I've the privilege of leading the Royals like this the last, like I said, almost, just a couple years has been just so overwhelming, and so many of those really just kind of like pinch me moments. I think one of those was like the draft party, which I referenced a couple times, because it wasn't like, was another kind of not necessarily a checklist item that we had really prepared for, or knew that we wanted to put together. But we had the first pick in the draft, and we weren't necessarily going to plan anything for the community. And then we just made the decision, like, okay, we're going to put this on and put this together. And then when I was there, and we held it at the stadium, and we invited like all of the youth programs, and the turnout was incredible. And then just to be able to see on these young girls, and we put, the draft all up on the big screen, and, we had made it a party environment. We had like, very like just community celebration. And I remember just like, and I brought my kids, and like vividly seeing like their faces. And, we ended up, also, we selected Allie and we selected Brecken, and like seeing their faces, and their celebration, and like being in that moment with the community to like bring those players, those professional women, to Utah. It was just such a gratifying moment, and to be able to like celebrate it with all of the young girls and boys in the community, was definitely it was just a huge highlight, to be able to share it. And you could just feel the energy and the happiness, and like that it made the team coming to Utah really real. And you could, now we had these players coming, these professional women. So that was definitely a highlight of my time as president. And then of course, like, our first goal, like, all of those moments. But the draft party was, because it was really like the first time that we really connected the team to the community. And that was really like earth shattering to just be there with these young girls and boys, and feel that with them.
Yeah, that's great. And that's, I think that's another, we get a whole host of responses when we ask people a question like that of looking backwards, but a common theme is that it's always to do with people, whether it's community, whether it's, to your point, the legacy that you're now leaving with the Royals. It's always the impact you've made on other human beings, because at the end of the day, that's the most important part of all of this. You know, it's not teams that have won championships. As soon as the next season starts, the last championship goes out the window and you're starting again, but the impact you've made on someone from an event, from a moment, doesn't go away. That stays with that person. So that's, you know, great to hear that you've had a similar experience of being able to not just be surrounded by that, but also, you know, bring that to life yourself. So that's amazing. But I mean, that's, I think, all from us. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on, Michelle. Again, thank you so much for your time, most importantly, but also sharing your insights, your background, your history. It's been a real pleasure to hear everything that you don't get to, you know, see on a LinkedIn career profile, the articles we've read, the interviews we've already listened to, but to peel back some extra layers and learn more about you, all of the changes you've undergone, and now, of course, best of luck with your new position that you're moving into. And I'm sure maybe we'll have to talk again in a couple of years and ask about other sports that you've now gotten involved with and new fires that you've had to put out that you didn't foresee at this moment. But at the bottom of it all, thank you so much for your time, everything you've done for soccer so far, in the impact you've had, and particularly, of course, women's side of the game, the NWSL, and bringing the Royals back and moving the game forward in all aspects. So thank you for everything.
Thanks so much, Michelle.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching this episode of Off the Pitch. Don't forget to drop a follow or subscribe on the podcast platform you're listening from. That helps us bring stories like these to your ears each and every week. And if you have a minute, leave a review as well, as that helps us grow the Off the Pitch community and bring even more exciting guests on. See you in the next one.